The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, casting a sterile glow on the polished mahogany table. I sat at the far end, my hands folded neatly in front of me, fingertips cold despite the temperature-controlled room. The glass wall behind me reflected the skyline, tall, sharp buildings piercing a pale morning sky, a mirror of the ambition I used to wear like armor. I hadn't set foot in this building in nearly 2 years. Not since I handed over the reins. Not since I disappeared. Behind the curtain, all in the name of love and trust and a marriage I once believed in. Now I was back. And he didn't even notice. Ethan stood near the center of the room, gesturing toward a presentation projected on the wall. His voice was confident, polished, the same tone he used when closing big investors and charming board members. "We've been working closely with this client," he said, clicking to the next slide. She's more of a face than a force, if I'm being honest. Pretty sure, but the real work, that's all us." My picture appeared on the screen. Not a selfie, not a headshot. It was the photo we'd taken for the company launch, back when I was still CEO, before I stepped down, before he convinced me it was better for optics if he took the lead. My name had been airbrushed from the corner, replaced by his. A flicker of laughter passed between 2 men near the front. The kind of laughter that doesn't reach the eyes, smug and knowing. He didn't see me. Not really. He'd greeted me with a nod when I walked in, too caught up in performance to register who I was. Maybe he'd thought I was a new partner, or a consultant, or a nobody. The irony twisted inside me like a knife. Once, I was everything to him. His wife, his partner, his mirror. Now I was invisible. My hands curled in my lap, nails biting into my skin. I wore the ring still, a thin gold band he'd slipped onto my finger one October afternoon under a canopy of red leaves. I'd loved that ring once. Now it felt like a shackle. The presentation continued, slide after slide. Words like strategy, innovation, pivot buzzed in the air, hollow and insincere. And every few frames, I saw traces of my work, the branding I'd labored over, the pitch decks I'd stayed up nights perfecting, the concept Ethan once said would change everything. All of it repackaged, rebranded, rewritten. He stood, there, basking in admiration that wasn't his to receive. And I sat at the edge of a cliff made of silence. I looked around the room. No one else seemed to notice the tremor beneath the surface. Or maybe they did, but they didn't care. In this world, appearances meant everything. Success had a face, and they'd decided it was Ethan's. My throat tightened. Not with tears, with clarity. The moment passed like a storm cloud. And when the last slide flickered off, when the polite applause filled the air, when all eyes turned to me, the guest, the unknown, I stood. Chairs scraped gently against the floor. Ethan finally looked at me, really looked. His confident smirk faltered. I didn't smile. I let the silence stretch between us, taut and deliberate. The ring on my finger caught the light. It burned. I opened my mouth to speak, but I won't tell you what I said. Not yet, because the truth doesn't always arrive in words. Sometimes it arrives in silence. I met Ethan in a thunderstorm, not the kind that soaks your skin, the kind that brews behind your ribs, electric and unexpected. I was at a networking event, underdressed and over-caffeinated, clutching a stack of pitch decks like they were life vests. My startup was 2 months away from collapse. I hadn't paid myself in 6. He was smooth in a way that made you feel chosen. Not the oily, rehearsed kind. No, Ethan's charm had polish, precision, like he'd studied you before you even opened your mouth. "You're Alina Rose?" he asked, eyes scanning the company name on my card. "I've heard your name come up. Disruptive, bold. I didn't recognize then that he always led with admiration. It was his favorite weapon. He listened to my idea like it was the most important story he'd ever heard, asked smart questions, laughed at the right moments, offered to introduce me to a few contacts. Just like that, my world tilted, a little at first, then more and more, until I was building my dreams around the scaffolding of his presence. My sister Mara was the first to raise an eyebrow. "He's a little too polished," she said one night, twirling the stem of her wine glass. "Like he knows what version of himself to wear around you." But I waved her off, told her she didn't know him, told her he was different when it was just us. He was kind to me in those early days, generous with praise, thoughtful, supportive. He'd sit beside me in late-night meetings, rub my shoulders when I stared too long at code. I mistook those gestures for partnership. Then came the suggestions. "Let me take the next investor meeting," he offered one day. "You've been burning the candle at both ends. And let's be honest, some of these guys respond better to another guy in the room. Unfair, but true." It was said gently, reasonably. A favor. A shield. I was exhausted. So I agreed. He started coming to every pitch after that. Gradually, my voice in those rooms grew softer. His grew louder. Then he recommended we rebrand. "Rose Tech sounds too feminine," he said, sipping his espresso like it was gospel. "We want something sleek, neutral, so you're not pigeonholed." He made it sound like protection, like he was preserving my vision, so we changed the name. It didn't feel like a big deal at the time, just a logo, a nameplate, a domain. But something in me mourned. Quietly. The erosion came in whispers. A presentation he gave alone. A press interview where he forgot to mention me. A silent nod. Of approval, I learned to crave like oxygen. When he proposed, he knelt beneath the oak tree in my mother's backyard. The same one I used to climb as a child, pretending it was a castle. He opened a velvet box, and inside was a thin gold band. No diamond, just a curve of simple, perfect gold. "You're everything I've ever wanted," he said. "Let's build an empire, together." I said yes. Of course I did. In the months that followed, I found myself stepping back from the company. Not all at once, but in careful inches. Ethan insisted it was temporary. "You've done the hard part," he told me. "Let me carry it from here." So I let him. I started designing from home, then stopped altogether. I poured myself into other things. Our wedding, our apartment, our life. I told myself I was making room for balance, that love meant compromise, that I was still needed, even if I wasn't seen. Looking back, it's clear. I wasn't stepping back. I was being written out. Each small surrender felt like love. That was the cruelest part of all. He didn't demand control. He accepted it, one gentle, silken thread at a time, until I was tied in place, smiling inside a cage I helped him build. The wedding ring is still on my finger. I twist it sometimes, the way a prisoner might test their chains. It's beautiful, understated, almost invisible, just like me. I used to wear perfume to feel powerful, a sharp jasmine scent in a black glass bottle. I stopped wearing it sometime, after our first anniversary. One day, I caught Ethan wrinkling his nose and saying, "That stuff's too loud. You don't need it. You're already pretty." And I never sprayed it again. I remember that now, and the grief is slow and thick, like honey poured over old photographs. It wasn't that I forgot who I was. It's that I folded her up neatly and put her away, hoping one day Ethan would remember where I left her. He never did. It didn't happen all at once. No one tells you how betrayal arrives. Not as a scream. but as a sigh. A quiet erosion of self. You don't notice the cliff is crumbling until the sea is lapping at your toes and the edge is gone. The first time, I truly saw him. I was seated beside Ethan at a dinner party hosted by one of his venture capital friends. Candlelight flickered over polished plates, and soft jazz hummed beneath the clatter of wine glasses. I had just started describing a new AI interface I'd been sketching on the side. Something I'd begun to imagine again, quietly, in notebooks, that no longer belonged to us. And then I realized, I said, warming up, that predictive language could... Ethan cut in with a laugh, resting a casual hand on my knee, as if to tether me back to silence. She's always dreaming up something, he said to the man across from us. It's adorable. A real creative phase she went through. I blinked. Phase. As if the company I built from ramen-fueled nights and caffeinated code sprints was no more significant than a summer hobby. The room chuckled politely. My throat tightened. I tried to smile, but something inside me was already folding in on itself. After that, I noticed the pattern. Every conversation became a game of diminishing. A tilt of the head when I offered an opinion. A smirk when I tried to join discussions about real business. Once, at Thanksgiving, my own father asked Ethan how he'd grown Rose & Co. and so quickly. And Ethan didn't correct him. He didn't say my name once. I excused myself early that night, blaming a headache. I sat in the parked car for 10 minutes, clutching the steering wheel, too numb to cry. The rot was quiet, but constant. Then came the night I found the second phone. He was in the shower. I was putting away laundry. Mundane, ordinary. A folded shirt. A sock without its pair. I opened his nightstand drawer to tuck away a cufflink that had fallen. Under the bed, and there it was. Sleek, black, unfamiliar. At first, I thought it might be a work backup. I almost didn't touch it. Almost. But my fingers closed around it like they were answering a question I hadn't yet dared to ask. It wasn't password protected. The messages were all there. A litany of shared lies, inside jokes, half naked. Photos of her. Her name was Marissa. But what gutted me wasn't the flirtation. It was the way he spoke of me. She used to be sharp. I'll give her that. But she lost the edge. Now she just sort of floats. Cute, though. Still good for optics. I made that company what it is. She was the pretty face. I was the engine. She thinks she's still in the game. It's kind of sad, honestly. And the voice note. God. That voice note. His voice, lazy with amusement, low and confident. Alina's just a pretty face who didn't know when to quit. I'll always be grateful. But I outgrew her. My ears rang. The room tilted. I walked to the bathroom like a sleepwalker, clutching the phone like a curse. He was still humming in the shower, steam curling up the mirror. I stood there, staring at my reflection through the fog, waiting for something inside me to break. But it didn't. It didn't break. It burned. That woman in the mirror. She wasn't me. She was a hollow shell shaped by years of swallowing herself, of agreeing to shrink so he could grow. Her skin looked pale under the fluorescent light. Her hair was tied back in a lazy knot. Her perfume, the jasmine one, had long since collected dust on a forgotten shelf. I touched the gold band on my finger. My hand trembled, but my gaze held steady. That night, I checked into a hotel under my maiden name. I didn't cry, not even once. I sat on the stiff mattress, the hum of the mini fridge in the background, and pulled out a blank notebook. Not the digital kind. Not a tablet. A real notebook, paper and pen. And I wrote, I remember who I am now. The next morning, before the sun rose, I packed a single suitcase. I left him no confrontation, no speech, no flurry of rage or tears, just a note on the kitchen counter beside his favorite mug, the one that used to say "World's Best CEO" in gold letters. I slipped my wedding ring inside. The note read, "You erased me so slowly, you thought I wouldn't notice, but I do. I remember who I am now. Good luck keeping my crown warm." The sea didn't ask questions. It didn't care about my past, my resume, my mistakes, or the ring I no longer wore. It simply breathed, in and out, like it had for centuries. And somehow, that made it easier to remember how to breathe, myself. The cottage I found sat just off a quiet coastal road, nestled behind wind-worn dunes and a crooked white fence. It smelled like salt and cedar, and the floorboards creaked like they remembered other women who'd come here to forget. I paid in cash, gave a name that wasn't mine. The woman who handed me the key didn't ask why I was there alone. I was grateful. The first night, I couldn't sleep. The silence was too loud. No hum of city traffic. No clinking of Ethan's whiskey glass. No glowing screen pulling me back into performative productivity. Just the echo of the waves and the ache behind my eyes. I lay there, wide awake, staring at the ceiling fan turning like a slow clock. By morning, I was barefoot on the sand, the hem of my sweatshirt catching the breeze. The sea looked different here, wilder. Less staged than the beaches Ethan had taken me to, the kind with infinity pools and curated sunsets for photo ops. This sea was honest, messy, and it matched the chaos inside me perfectly. I started walking. I didn't set a destination. I didn't need one. I let the wind tangle my hair. I let the water lick at my ankles. I let my mind unravel. For the first time in what felt like years, I cried without having to hide. There's a small bookstore tucked between a bakery and a surf shop at the edge of town. I walked in on accident, or maybe on instinct. The scent of old paper and something cinnamon pulled me in like a memory I couldn't quite name. The woman behind the counter looked like she belonged to the space, like a favorite character in the right story. Her name was May. Short gray curls, eyes like the tide, and a voice soft as wool. She didn't ask questions when I lingered by the poetry section for too long. She didn't flinch when I flinched at the sound of my own name. She just offered a mug of warm tea and said, "Sometimes the best stories begin after everything falls apart." I went back the next day, and the day after. Eventually, May invited me to a Thursday night gathering. Just a few local women who shared wine and talked about art and business and the little things that kept them going. They met in the back of the shop, where string lights hung like stars over a worn round table. There was an herbalist, a painter, a woman who sold hand-dyed linens online. They didn't know who I used to be, and I didn't offer it. Instead, I listened. I laughed. I let the silence inside me stretch open and make room for other voices. One of the women, a tall, freckled sculptor named Tess, said something that lodged itself in my chest. When someone chips away at you long enough, you forget you were ever whole, but clay remembers its shape. That night, I opened my journal again. The first pages were raw, just bleeding words, grief in ink. But then came sketches, notes, frameworks, a new logo. I wasn't trying to rebuild what I'd lost. I was designing something else entirely. Something Ethan could never touch. Mornings became sacred. I walked the beach with a thermos of black coffee and let the sun melt the frost from my skin. The perfume I once wore, jasmine and bergamot, remained sealed in the zippered pocket of my suitcase. I wasn't ready yet, not for the woman who wore that scent. Not until I could meet her eyes in the mirror again without shame. But I started wearing color again. A deep rust scarf, sea glass earrings I found in May's shop, small acts of reclamation, and my laptop. God, I had almost been afraid to open it, like he might still be hiding in the code. But when I finally did, the screen blinked awake and didn't judge me. I renamed the folder. Not Rose & Co. Not anything he could claim. Just A. That's all. A seed. A start. I reworked the product entirely. Not just a revamp of old tech, but a pivot towards something cleaner, more human. An ethical AI model that prioritized creator rights and transparency. Something I would have never gotten funding. For back when I was told to smile more and speak less. But now I didn't care who approved. I wasn't doing this for investors. I was doing this to prove to myself that I hadn't disappeared. That underneath the grief and the silence and the manipulation, I was still here. Still Alina. Still me. One afternoon, after a particularly long session of writing specs in a cafe by the harbor, I stopped by May's bookstore to return a borrowed novel. She was restocking shelves, humming some old jazz tune. She glanced up and smiled. "You look different," she said. I blinked. "Do I?" May nodded. "Lighter." I laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "Maybe I'm just less haunted today." She tilted her head, then handed me a small box from behind the counter. Someone dropped this off. Said it belonged to someone finding her. Way. Inside was a simple sea glass pendant on a thin silver chain. No note. Just a sense that maybe the world hadn't forgotten me after all. I wore it the next morning on my walk, letting it rest against my collarbone, cool and steady. The warm wind picked up. The waves roared louder, and I knew in my bones I was no longer hiding. I was healing. They say the most dangerous woman is the one who rebuilds herself in silence. I didn't return to reclaim what I'd lost. I came back to claim what had always been mine. Ethan thought he'd buried me in that silence. That when I walked away, suitcase in hand, I walked out of the narrative. But I hadn't vanished. I had stepped behind the curtain, where the real magic happens. The invisible architecture. The levers no one sees. While he flaunted borrowed power, I was building the foundation that would strip it away. The truth was, I had never truly signed over the business. Not in any legal sense. Ethan operated on perception, charisma, and my trust. He'd made moves in public, painted himself as the visionary, but the bones of the company were still tied to me. A technicality, yes. But legalities are made of technicalities. I reached out to Daniel, an old friend from grad school, who'd since become a formidable corporate attorney. He didn't ask what happened. He simply said, "Send me everything." What followed was a careful, calculated unraveling of Ethan's illusion. The trust fund he used to pay for his image, collapsing. The company's financials, a mess. His claim to ownership, paper thin. The moment we pushed, everything began to split at the seams. I signed the reinstatement papers with a new pen, a new nameplate, and the sea glass pendant resting, cool against my throat. I wore the perfume again that day. Jasmine and bergamot. It clung to my skin like memory, but this time it didn't ache. It radiated. The company I rebuilt didn't look like the one we had launched together, because in truth, that company had always been his mask stitched over my blueprint. This time, I built something honest. I named it Kalira. A word I made, up, soft on the tongue, strong in presence. It meant nothing to anyone else, but to me, it whispered of roots and rebirth. It was mine in every sense. I rehired women I had once mentored, engineers, designers, analysts, women who'd been passed over in the old system. I launched an internal accelerator to help new female founders access capital, mentorship, and protection from exactly the kind of charming predators Ethan had modeled so well. We didn't chase media attention. We didn't need to. Deals found us through word of mouth. Quiet excellence always does. When I signed a contract with a global tech firm for a cross-continental ethical data initiative, I wept. Not because I doubted we could do it, but because I finally remembered that I had always been the one capable. I had just needed the noise to die down to hear myself think again. I kept tabs on Ethan, though I didn't speak his name aloud. Watching from afar felt like watching a man drown in a pool he insisted was shallow. His pitches fell apart. The board meetings grew tense. Investors grew wary of his swagger without results. He tried to resurrect pieces of the original project, my project. But it was like watching someone plagiarize a language they never learned to speak. And then I heard it. A whisper through the industry vine. Ethan was scheduled to present at the Vanta Global Tech Forum. My brainchild, the concept we had originally pitched together years ago, was now his latest innovation. I laughed when I read the announcement, not out of bitterness, but with the clarity of someone who had finally stopped bleeding. May, when I told her, simply raised her teacup and said, "Well, let the ghost walk through the fire." So I registered, anonymously, not to confront, not to reclaim the stage, just to witness the final unraveling. The event was held in San Francisco, sleek, glassy, and cold in that particular way of tech cities. I hadn't been back in years. The last time I'd set foot in that convention center. I was a woman in heels too high, with a smile too bright, clinging to Ethan's arm like it was oxygen. This time I walked alone. I wore a charcoal blazer over silk, sharp lines, soft strength. No wedding ring, no name tag. My perfume wrapped around me like armor. The lobby buzzed with chatter. I kept to the edges, my eyes tracking familiar faces, old contacts, new founders, people who'd nodded at Ethan like he was the sun. I found a seat near the back of the auditorium, where I could see everything without being seen. And then he appeared. Ethan walked onto that stage with the same rehearsed confidence he had always used, like the world was lucky to be in his orbit. The lights hit his profile just right. He still had that smirk. But something in his eyes had dimmed. Maybe it was the desperation. Maybe it was the knowing. He began his pitch, slides flickering behind him like ghosts of my old drafts. Same architecture. Same keywords, but hollow, soulless. He spoke of innovation, of collaboration, of legacy. He never once mentioned me, but I didn't need him to, because the version he presented was dead on arrival, old tech dressed in new jargon. It drew polite applause, but not interest, not belief. I could see it in the faces around me, the quiet tilt of heads, the skeptical murmurs, and then came the questions. Sharp, technical, probing. He faltered. He blamed bandwidth. He laughed, too loudly. He made a sexist remark to deflect, the kind that used to earn him chuckles from frat boy investors. Not today. The moderator's smile went tight. The audience leaned back. And just like that, the mask slipped. He didn't crash. Not loudly, not dramatically. He simply deflated, and I watched it all from the shadows. Not with vengeance, not with pity, with peace. Outside, I stood at the edge of the sidewalk, the afternoon sun pressing gold against the skyline. I pulled out my phone, opened the press release draft I'd prepared weeks ago. With one tap, I sent it to every major outlet. Kalira launches ethical AI platform with global impact deal. Founder Alina Vera returns with industry-leading vision. It went live before he even stepped off stage. By the time I reached my hotel, the headline had overtaken every channel. My photo, the new one, taken by Tess in front of the sea, was splashed across the top. No Ethan in sight, just me. The woman who was never just a pretty face. The woman who built, fell, remembered, and rose. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a room before something unholy begins. It isn't loud. It isn't angry. It's clean, hollowed out, like the breath before a storm. That's what I remember as I sat in the third row, center aisle, heels anchored, palms dry. Ethan stood on the stage of the Vanta Global Tech Forum like he belonged there, all swagger and silver-tongued brilliance. His suit was tailored to perfection, his grin sharp enough to slice through glass. He fed off attention, as always. The room was full of tech elites, industry leaders, venture capitalists, influencers, the very people we once dreamed of standing before together. But now, I wasn't dreaming. I was watching. He welcomed the audience like a showman, launched into his presentation like clockwork. The lights dimmed, the screen behind him glowed, and the first slide popped up. Elysium Project, A Vision for Ethical AI, by Ethan Marlowe, my old title, my stolen work, my words, rearranged into something lifeless. And then the second slide loaded. Only, it wasn't his. It was mine. A black screen. White serif font. One line, "You can't steal a legacy when the architect is still." Alive, gasps, whispers. The screen glitched again, except it wasn't a glitch. It was a reveal. My name appeared in bold beneath the quote, Alina Vera, founder, architect, survivor. The next slide rolled in, the Kalira logo, sleek and strong. And then another, my face, the press photo from the launch framed by the "See behind me." Someone near the front row stood. I rose, and the room held its breath. My heels clicked against the floor like a slow drumbeat. I didn't rush. There was no need. Ethan froze. He blinked, smiled, a twitchy, confused thing, and then tried to laugh, like this was some kind of PR stunt. It wasn't. I stepped onto the stage. He opened his mouth, but I was already speaking. "Thank you, Ethan," I said softly, taking the microphone from the podium. "I'll take it from here." He reached for the mic again. I didn't move, didn't flinch, just turned toward the audience. "My name is Alina Vera," I said, voice calm, even. I was once introduced as the pretty face behind the brand. I was once told that my intelligence was decorative, and I was once in love with the man beside me. You could feel the oxygen shifting. I built this company. I wrote the code, the ethics framework, the business model. What I didn't write was the script he's just attempted to read. That was improvised. A ripple of uneasy laughter. Ethan took a step back. I let him. 3 years ago, I was pushed out of my own vision by someone I trusted with my heart, my home, and my work. He told others I was unstable. He laughed about me in voice messages with someone who wasn't his wife. He stole my voice, repackaged it, and sold it to rooms like this one. I looked out at the sea of eyes, glittering under spotlight. But here's the thing about ghosts. We don't haunt. We wait. And then we return to collect what was always ours. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't ask for sympathy. I told the truth, how he hijacked my company, how he erased my name from the credits, how he paraded a mistress through the halls I had built, how he almost convinced the world, and me, that I was small. And then I told them about Kalira, the new team, the ethical partnerships, the global contract we'd signed just days before, and the real future of ethical AI, not this cobbled-together imitation he'd tried to pitch. I didn't come here to humiliate him, I said at last. I came to reclaim clarity, and to remind every woman who's ever been called decorative, we are the foundation. We are not replaceable. I turned slowly. Ethan stood off to the side, pale now, silent. I handed the mic back to the moderator, who didn't look at him, only nodded once to me. As I stepped down from the stage, a woman with straight black hair and an expression like ice intercepted me. "Ms. Vera," she said, "service documents, from the board, and from your attorney." She placed the sealed envelope in Ethan's hand without a word. He didn't move, didn't open it. The other woman, his mistress, stood further back in the crowd, face unreadable. When our eyes met, she flinched, and then she turned and walked away, through the exit, heels clicking like punctuation. I didn't stay for the rest of the forum. I didn't need to. By the time my flight touched down, Ethan's name had been stripped from the company's website. The board, it turned out, had been waiting for a reason. My legal case gave them one. He was removed within 48 hours. Within a week, a quiet retraction appeared in a corner of a business journal. Ethan Marlowe steps down amid legal scrutiny and leadership restructuring. No mention of me. No apology. Just silence. Which was fine, because silence was mine now. I returned to the coast just as the late tide was coming in. The salt air wrapped around me like a lullaby. The sky was pale with early dusk, streaked with soft lavender and orange. I walked, barefoot down to the beach, the cool sand folding around my toes. In my pocket was my wedding ring. Platinum, heavy, once radiant. Now just a symbol of blindness. I looked down at it, held it in my palm. All that time, I had thought the ring meant permanence. But nothing permanent ever lives in metal. It lives in memory. And even that fades if you're lucky. I walked to where the sea met the sand, knelt, and dug a small hole with my hands. Not too deep, just enough to cover. I placed the ring inside, watched it gleam one last time in the fading light. And then I buried it. A small grave for a version of myself I no longer carried. I sat there for a long while, listening to the rhythm of the waves, not thinking, not planning, just being. Somewhere, behind me, May's wind chime danced faintly in the breeze. I knew I'd return to the cottage soon, make tea, maybe journal. I knew tomorrow I'd wake up and walk the shore again, not as a woman haunted, but as one reborn. And maybe, someday, I'd fall in love again. But not with someone who needed to shrink me to feel big. I had no space left for that kind of man. As the tide came in, I whispered the last line to the sea, a mantra I carried now, in bone and breath. He mistook my silence for weakness. He didn't know silence can be strategy.